He was the first door-to-door salesman I'd encountered in years. The small, tidy man smiled as I watched him through my Ring doorbell. "Can I help you?" I asked through the intercom. "Good morning, ma'am," the stranger replied, stepping back to look into the camera. "I'm a representative of Red Star Pest Control, and I'd love a few minutes of your time to talk about an exciting new offer." "No, thank you." The man's smile didn't drop, but his blue eyes flickered. "It will only take a moment, and I promise it's a deal you'll hate to miss." He lifted up a briefcase. "If I could just show you a few of our..." I said, "No, thank you. Have a good day." His smile disappeared. The salesman stared into the ring with a blank face. "Perhaps I could speak to the man of the house," he said, voice flat. "He's, sleeping," I lied, not wanting to admit I was alone. "Have a great day." The little salesman didn't move for almost 2 minutes. I timed him. Then, suddenly, his smile snapped back into place as he walked from my doorstep to my neighbor's. I couldn't see their interaction on my Ring camera, so I peeked out of a window. My neighbor, Mr. Ellis, was retired and friendly and lonely, so I wasn't surprised to see him open the door for the salesman. The peddler was animated, tapping his briefcase and gesturing at Ellis's yard. Whatever he was saying seemed to worry the old man. He started to eye his lawn suspiciously. After only a minute or so of talking on the porch, the pair disappeared into the house, and I went back to cleaning my garage, soon forgetting all about the stranger. A week or so later, I noticed that Mr. Ellis's grass was overgrown. Weeds were beginning to poke out of well-manicured flower beds. Since he was passionate about keeping his lawn neat, I worried that he might have had an accident or medical issue. My worry grew deeper when I saw that his mailbox was stuffed to the point of overflowing. Letters were spilling out of the box because it was too full for the lid to close. I noticed at least a dozen plastic-wrapped magazines, and most of the envelopes looked like junk mail. It made me sad to wonder how many subscriptions my neighbor had, and how many he may have signed up for just to have a conversation with the person making the sale. Mr. Ellis had given me a key to his house the year before, so I could feed his dogs while he was away on a trip. I let myself into his house when he didn't answer. The odor hit me the moment I opened the door. The stench was almost a physical sensation, like the air itself had hardened and rotted. It was the smell of old meat, sour milk, of wet garbage left to spoil, and under all of it was a trace of something sickly sweet. I gagged and stepped back onto the porch, fighting to keep my breakfast down. "Mr. Ellis?" I yelled into the open door. "Mr. Ellis? Are you in there? Are you hurt?" A fat fly the size of a dime drifted out of the house and landed on a nearby set of wind chimes. Another fly followed, and then a third. I stared at the one on the chimes. I'd never seen one of the things get so big. Its eyes were red-tinted and massive. Black hairs ran across its body so thickly they resembled fur. A sharp pinch on my cheek caused me to gasp and swat at the area. My hand came back sticky with the remains of one of the flies smeared over my palm. They liked to bite. I didn't want to go into the house. It would be easy for me to call 911 and then wait for the authorities. That would be safer, smarter. Then an image of my elderly neighbor, alive but hurt, horribly flashed in my mind. What if he'd fallen? What if he was gravely ill? What if he was dying that very moment, while I stood on the porch swatting flies? Taking a deep breath of outside air, I covered my mouth and nose with my shirt and walked into the house. Mr. Ellis's living room was full of the bloated flies. I saw them huddled in clusters on the walls and the ceiling. A buzzing black cloud of them rose up from the couch as I passed it. I noticed a familiar briefcase, with several glass tubes inside resting open on Mr. Ellis's coffee table, next to 2 half-full coffee mugs. Each of the mugs had a splatter of blue mold growing on the coffee. It looked like the salesman had gotten comfortable while making his pitch. The odor of rot grew stronger the further I walked into Mr. Ellis's house. I was nearly choking on it, even breathing through my shirt by the time I reached the hallway and saw the bathroom door standing ajar. No matter how long I live, I'll never forget the sight of the old man in his bathtub. Mr. Ellis was naked in a tub half filled with swirling white, gold, and red fluid. The man's body was covered in hundreds of the fat, black flies. They rose in an angry swarm when I fully pushed open the bathroom door. The flies were everywhere, settled on the walls, and poor Mr. Ellis. Many of the insects had drowned in the nightmarish liquid. My neighbor was as pale as the milk surrounding him, and swollen with a week's worth of decomposition. His body was covered with dozens, maybe hundreds, of small, circular wounds. The smell of that room, saccharine and sour and rotting, makes my stomach cramp even thinking about it. I ran from the house to call the police. A friend at the sheriff's department later told me how Mr. Ellis had died. He'd been hobbled and drugged, tendons in his wrists and ankles sliced. Then he'd been left in a bathtub full of milk and honey, while the flies, an exotic kind that liked to bite and burrow and lay eggs and flesh, slowly ate the man alive. At some point, hopefully after he was already dead, the eggs hatched, leaving the bloody spots I'd noticed as the larvae chewed their way out. I dream of that salesman some nights. His cobalt eyes and dissolving smile. In my dreams, I open the door. Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed today's first of 2 stories. I want to take a quick second to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. It really helps the channel grow and reach more new people. I was checking recently and saw that around half the people who watch the channel aren't yet subscribed, so I hope you'll take a quick second to hit that button if you haven't yet. Alright, now on to our next story. The patient, Martin Dory, was declared dead at 11:19 p.m. last night. Dr. Casey, the attending, began an intravenous administration of my formula, Lowen 114, at approximately 11 p.m., when it became obvious that the patient would not. One of the observers raised her hand. Yes, Dr. Brine? Dr. Narrows, is there any chance that the introduction of Lowen 114 into a living patient had adverse effects? No, Narrows snapped. As I've explained many times, Lowen 114 is harmless. It merely preserves living tissue when death is imminent, allowing for the best chance of near-complete personality recovery after the rest of the process is completed. Theoretically. Pardon? Brine shifted in her seat. Well, no offense, Doctor, but you're using absolute terms, and my understanding is that your method is still untested. Well, that's why you're here today, Narrows said. The doctor and his 6 witnesses, all doctors themselves save one technician, peered through the observation window at the dead man. The room was bare, other than the stainless steel table holding the corpse, and a few silent medical devices. Lowen 114 holds the dying body in a form of stasis, Dr. Narrows explained. After approximately 12 hours of incubation, the rest of the Narrows method can be applied. He nodded to the technician at the control panel. You may proceed. Despite his bluster, Narrows held his breath as the man flipped a series of switches. If his method failed, he'd be a joke. If it succeeded... Several minutes passed with no change to the condition of the corpse. Narrows was uncomfortably aware of all the eyes watching him, though he kept his gaze locked on the window. After approximately 15 minutes, Martin's corpse began to twitch. Beginning to smile, Narrows addressed the group. When we applied the method to animals, the results were inconclusive. However, Dear God. Narrows stared as Martin sat up from the table. The dead man looked slowly around the room until his eyes found the observation window. He froze and began to shiver. That is one-way glass, correct? Dr. Bryan asked, leaning back in her chair. Yes, Narrows replied. He is merely seeing his own reflection. Jesus Christ, Doctor, the technician whispered. You've done it. Narrows grinned as the other doctors began to clap. He noticed that Bryan alone was not celebrating. Not just a theory now, is it, Elizabeth? Narrows asked, biting down on a grin. Bryan was staring at the shaking body. Is he looking at me? It did seem like Martin's attention was focused on the young doctor, but Narrows dismissed it as a coincidence. Just admiring his own reflection, Elizabeth, he said. Now, I think this calls for champagne. Throughout the celebration, the revived man sat staring at the observation window. Narrows had to admit that the corpse's eyes did seem to track Dr. Bryan as she moved around the room. Other doctors noticed the phenomenon as well, though they all appeared to accept Narrows' explanation that the newly returned Martin was just likely fascinated by his own reflection, and his eye movement was a coincidence. When Bryan left the party early and the dead man became still, Narrows relaxed enough to begin joking that perhaps Martin simply had a nose for skeptics. Throughout the observation period, Martin's vitals never registered any higher than their baseline, which is to say 0. His heart did not beat, his blood did not pump through shriveled arteries, and not even the faintest flash could be detected on the EEG, despite Martin's earlier animation. Narrows was at a complete loss for an explanation, particularly since the dead man was still sitting up on his own accord, and continued displaying occasional bouts of the strange shivering. Most likely it's a technical issue with the machines, Narrow told the room of doctors, ignoring the raised eyebrows of the technician, who had only that morning confirmed that all of the equipment was operating. It has to be the machines, Narrows thought. Or maybe the subject's vitals are too low for normal detection, but otherwise functional. The only other explanation is that a genuinely dead body is somehow able to move. That last thought made the doctor uncomfortable, but he dismissed it quickly. It was a day to celebrate, and he wasn't willing to dwell on unpleasant speculation. Narrows decided to monitor Martin for a week to make sure the resurrection held. The next day, when the team assembled, the dead man was standing still in the corner, and Bryan was missing. She was found dead this morning, the technician informed Narrows. Her heart, apparently. She was so young, Narrows muttered, feeling the first twinge of anxiety. Did she have a history of heart issues? The technician didn't know. Neither did any of the other assembled doctors. Narrows recalled the way Martin's glassy, blue eyes had followed Bryan through the observation window. The memory sent a chill down the doctor's spine. Why haven't the machines been recalibrated or replaced? Narrows asked his technician, after noticing that Martin's vitals were still not registering. None of my team are comfortable going into the room with him. Comfortable? This is medical history, Nero said, voice rising. Scientific history. This is borderline biblical. And your team isn't comfortable being in the same room as a miracle? Is that what you'd call it? The technician asked quietly. Dr. Narrows ignored the question. If none of your team will do the job, do it yourself. Absolutely not. Narrows' unease over Brian's death was fading in the heat of his anger. He was working with fools. Superstitious nimrods, unwilling or unable to complete the most basic of tasks. Of course the equipment wasn't functioning properly. Consider the condition of its keepers. Perhaps you could collect the vitals yourself? One of the other doctors suggested after overhearing the argument. How? Narrows snapped. The doctor swallowed nervously, but continued. The old-fashioned way? He mimicked listening for a heartbeat with a stethoscope. Narrows grew pale at the thought of entering the room alone and giving the dead man a physical. His discomfort increased when he realized that the room, previously humming with whispered conversations, had gone silent. Martin had moved. His body was stone still, but his head had rotated so that he was staring at Narrows. The corpse began to shiver again, even more violently than before. The anxiety in Narrow's stomach grew legs, and climbed until it filled his chest. He could almost taste it. A phantom, metallic bitterness that he tried again and again to swallow. I see our subject is lively today, the old doctor said, earning a few uncomfortable laughs. He moved away from the technician toward the center of the room. Narrows purposefully put his back to the observation window, but he could tell from the rising alarm on the faces of his peers that Martin was still watching him. The doctor took a bottle of water from a nearby table, wishing it was yesterday's champagne, but desperate for anything that could wash that metallic taste away. No matter how much he drank, though, his mouth stayed sour. As you can all see, the subject remains animate, and is, potentially, beginning to show signs of awareness of his environment. Now, due to technical issues, Narrows shot the technician an acidic glare. We don't have a full picture of dear Martin's status post-resurrection, but I think you'd all agree that any signs of vigor after clinical death are astonishing. The doctor took a deep breath and turned around to face the dead man. If we... Narrows trailed off. He'd made the mistake of eye contact with the corpse. Martin's eyes, clouded with cataracts, were tracking the doctor. Unblinking, unwavering, the dead man's stare was like kerosene poured on the embers of Narrows' anxiety. His chest grew warmer and warmer. And then, suddenly, he was freezing. Narrows became so cold that he began to shake, and the worry in his chest grew so uncomfortable that it actually began to hurt, to cramp, to ache. The room wobbled, and Narrows felt his vision swim until he couldn't be sure which direction he was facing. His knees buckled and he fell. The other doctors surrounded him, but Narrows only saw a gray ring full of whispering shadows. "Get off of me," he tried to say. The pressure on Narrows' chest was so terrible that he thought one of the idiots must be standing on him. His voice betrayed him, starved of the breath it needed to form words. A new sound began to drown out the whispering. A dry, hacking noise that flooded Narrows' ears until it was all he could hear. The doctor's head lolled to the side, his vision clearing just enough for him to make out the observation window and the shaking face pressed against the glass. Martin, though his expression was blank, was laughing. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGrupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.